He was gone for 17 years, and then, on April 24th, 2026, the lights went down in cinemas on 6 continents. The music started, and Michael Jackson walked back into the world. Not the real Michael. This was Jaafar Jackson, 29 years old, his nephew, his blood, moving across the screen with a precision that made audience after audience stop breathing for a moment. Because something in the way he moved was not imitation. It was recognition. Because it was him. People who had loved Michael Jackson since childhood sat in the dark and felt something they had not expected to feel. They felt him in the room. And then they went home. And then they came back. And then they told everyone they knew. By June 2026, less than 3 months after it opened, Michael had earned $932 million worldwide, the highest-grossing music biopic in the history of cinema. But the most shocking part, you still haven't heard it. For 7 years, that record had belonged to Bohemian Rhapsody, $910 million, 4 Oscars, 7 years at the summit, untouched. Elvis tried. Bob Marley tried. Nobody came close. Michael broke it in 3 months. And the critics had given it 38% on Rotten Tomatoes. Ask yourself what that means. A film with 38% from critics becomes the most commercially successful music biopic in history. Not despite the music, because of it. The music did not need the critics' permission. It never has. And now everything changed. Here is what the film is. Michael begins in 1966 in a living room in Gary, Indiana, where Joe Jackson drove his 5 sons through rehearsals like a military exercise. It ends in 1988 on the stage of Wembley Stadium, where the Bad World Tour reached its London climax. Everything that came after 1988, the decade that changed everything, is acknowledged in 4 words on a title card at the end of the film. His story continues. The critics called it sanitized, incomplete, a filmed playlist in search of a story. They were not entirely wrong. But here is the detail nobody reported. Those 4 words, his story continues, were not part of the original plan. According to sources close to the production, that title card was added approximately 1 month before the film opened, when the filmmakers and the studios began to realize how large this was going to become. It was a last-minute decision. A door left open because someone finally understood what was on the other side of it. The audiences came anyway, in Brazil, in France, in Japan, in 40 international markets that each individually exceeded what Bohemian Rhapsody had earned in its entire theatrical run. Think about what brought them there. Not the reviews, not the studio marketing. What brought them was simpler and more durable than any of that. The music brought them, and then the music kept them. And when they left the theater, the music went with them. Wait, don't miss this detail. Both films, Michael and Bohemian Rhapsody, were produced by the same man, Graham King. He set the record with one film. Then he broke his own record with the other. The same producer, 2 different artists, 7 years apart. 2 records, both his. That has never happened before in the history of music biopics. But even this, remarkable as it is, does not explain the $932 million. It does not explain why people who read the reviews and knew the film was probably flawed went anyway. It does not explain why people who had already seen it once went back. The explanation is not in the reviews. It is not in Graham King. The explanation is in a living room in Gary, Indiana, in 1966, where a 5-year-old boy heard music and knew, in whatever way children know things before they have words for them, that this was what he was. Now, everything you've seen so far means nothing, because the film you are watching, the film that earned $932 million, that broke a 7-year record, that made audiences in 40 countries feel something they had not expected to feel, almost didn't exist in the form you saw it. The original cut of Michael ran over 3.5 hours. It covered Michael Jackson's entire life. And its third act dramatized the 1993 allegations, the accusations that defined, destroyed, and outlasted the final chapter of his public life. Then someone found a clause. In a legal settlement with Jordan Chandler, one of Michael Jackson's accusers, there was a provision. He could never be depicted or mentioned in any commercial film. Ever. The Jackson estate, which was producing the movie, had missed it. They found it after the film had already been shot. 22 days of reshoots. A new third act. A new ending. Approximately $10 to $15 million. Paid by the estate because the oversight was theirs. The screenwriter John Logan's house had been damaged in the Palisades fire. The release date moved from April 2025 to October 2025 to spring 2026. And out of all of that, the legal discovery, the reshoots, the rewrite, the delay, came 4 words. His story continues. The film that exists is not the film that was intended. It is the film that survived. And the film that survived earned $932 million. I can't believe this either. But keep watching. When the Motown 25 scene plays, when Jaafar steps onto that stage and begins the Billie Jean performance, the one where Michael Jackson introduced the moonwalk to the world, something happens in the cinema that no critic's score can prevent, and no industry analyst could predict. The music begins, and suddenly, the film is not a film anymore. It is 1983. It is 47 million people watching on television, and the entire audience going completely silent as a 24-year-old man in a black sequined jacket and a white glove begins to move in a way that nobody has ever seen anyone move before. That silence, that is what fills cinemas in 2026. People who were alive in 1983 are sitting in the dark, re-experiencing something they thought they had already finished feeling. People who were not yet born are experiencing it for the first time. And the room is the same room. The silence is the same silence. You still haven't seen the biggest surprise. Jaafar Jackson had never acted in a film before Michael. He spent months with choreographers and vocal coaches, absorbing the physical language of a man he knew as his uncle, as family, as the person whose shadow fell across everything the Jackson name meant. He watched the footage until he could feel the movements in his own body. He tried to understand not just how Michael moved, but why. what was driving him from inside, what the music felt like from where he was standing. Director Antoine Fuqua, who had spent years preparing the film, admitted that his biggest fear going in was Jaafar. All I could think of was, can Jaafar really pull this off? He said. But when the music started and he hit those first few moves, this guy killed it. He has the desire, like Michael, to be the best. And in the performance sequences, Jaafar did something that transcends imitation. He opened a door, and through that door walked something that audiences in 6 continents recognized immediately. In the place before words, in the place where music lives. He brought Michael back into the room. Ask yourself what it costs to be gone for 17 years and then return like this. Not through archival footage, not through tribute concerts, through a 29-year-old who carries your blood and learned your moves and stood on the stages where you stood and found you in his own body. Michael Jackson died in June 2009. He was 50 years old. He was rehearsing for a comeback. The people who saw those rehearsals said he was better than he had been in years. He never got to show the world. The film gives him that showing, imperfectly, incompletely, with 4 words at the end acknowledging everything it leaves out. And here's the thing no one ever talks about. Lionsgate film chair Adam Fogelson confirmed at the premiere that a sequel is in development. "We absolutely have more story to tell," he said. "We have prepared for that moment." Graham King has outlined what that second film will cover. The Dangerous and Invincible albums. The building of Neverland Ranch. The story after 1988. The story the first film couldn't tell. But as of now, John Logan's screenplay for the sequel has not been finished. Nothing has been officially confirmed. The door is open. What walks through it and when remains unresolved. Which is fitting. Because that is exactly the state Michael Jackson left the world in. And the world, which has been carrying that unfinished story for 17 years, asking questions that have no clean answers and feeling things that have no clean names. The world went to sit with it in the dark. That is why $932 million, not the budget, not the studio, not even Jaafar, extraordinary as he is. The world is not finished with Michael Jackson. It never was. It probably never will be. Think about what that means. Not for the box office, not for the estate, for the people who bought the tickets, the ones who went alone, the ones who cried in the dark and didn't want the lights to come back up, the ones who sat through the credits because they weren't ready to leave the room where the music was. What were they looking for? What did they find? The same thing people have always found in Michael Jackson's music. The thing that has no clean name. The thing that lives in the space between the beat and the silence after it ends. This is what no headline ever captured. Both films, Bohemian Rhapsody and Michael, make the same choice. They end at the peak, before the complicated part. Bohemian Rhapsody ends at Live Aid in 1985, before Freddie Mercury's AIDS diagnosis became public. Michael ends in 1988, before 1993. Both films say, this is where the story is brightest. This is where we will leave you. And both films were rewarded with the same thing. Audiences who were grateful. who needed to be left there in the bright part, with the music playing. Because the rest of the story, the complicated part, the part with no clean answers, is already everywhere. The world does not need a film to tell it the complicated part. The complicated part it already knows. What it needed was to be in the room when the music starts. The record has been broken. The sequel is coming. And the music is still playing. Billie Jean. Thriller. Beat it. Don't stop till you get enough. Man in the Mirror. Smooth Criminal. Human Nature. The Way You Make Me Feel. Think about what it means to make something that outlasts you by decades and keeps growing. Not fading. Growing. Finding new people. Meaning different things at different points in a life. Songs that were made 40 years ago and sound like tomorrow. Songs that found their way into every country on earth and stayed there. Songs that a 29-year-old nephew learned to carry in his body so that the people who loved them could feel them one more time in the dark, with the lights down and the screen bright and the music filling the room. His story continues. Ask yourself one final time what it means that this is still happening. 17 years after his death, in cinemas on 6 continents, with a nephew carrying his moves in his body, with music made 40 years ago filling rooms that weren't built yet when it was recorded. That is the only ending that matters. That is the only ending there is.